Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Blood Red Podcast, brought to you by the Liverpool Echo in association with our sponsors, NordVPN. I'm your host, Theo Squires, and joining me today we have a very special guest. In 2012, he joined Liverpool as their Director of Research and spent 11 years at the club, helping lead the Reds' data revolution as they won every major honour in their path. It's Dr. Ian Graham. So, good morning, Ian. How are you today?
I'm very well, thanks, Theo. Nice to talk to you.
Thanks for joining us. Would you prefer Dr. Ian, Dr. Graham, or is Ian just fine?
Just call me Ian.
No worries. So part of the reason for today's episode is that Ian has a book coming out on August 15th, marvellously titled How to Win the Premier League, the inside story of football's data revolution. It's available to pre-order now. The information will be in our episode description, or if you're listening to this after August 15th, it's on sale now. So what are you waiting for? Go and get a copy. It'll be a fascinating read, offering a real insight into how data has shaped modern football and helped shape so many of those important decisions for Liverpool over the past decade on the way to winning the Premier League, the Champions League, and everything you can pretty much imagine. But I'm not the best person to tell you about the book. We've got the authors right here. So Ian, give us the big sell. What's the book about for you? No spoilers, but sum it up.
So there's been a big explosion in interest in football data analysis in the past decade or so. That's a big difference from when I started working in the field in 2005. There was very little data and even less interest in analysing the data. And I really wanted to sort of give a general overview of how it works and particularly how it's really applied at a football club. So there are a lot of misconceptions, a lot's been written from the outside. I really wanted to first of all, give an inside view of how these ideas actually impact decision-making at a club. And second of all, I think even though there's been that explosion of interest, it's kind of still a marginal thing in football. So I wanted to give the general fan an insight into the ideas and how they're applied without necessarily going into all of the equations and the mathematics behind it. And of course, the Liverpool story is quite a good story to base that data analysis scenario on.
So when did you first have the idea to write it? Because I think you left Liverpool, what was it, just over 12 months ago, but the departure was a few months in the making there. Is it something you've been working on before that?
Yeah, that's right. So it's something it's an idea I'd always had. I think there've been a lot of good books written about data analysis in football, but they've all been written by people outside the club world. And so, through no fault of the authors, they didn't see the full story, or when we would speak to journalists or other clubs would speak to journalists, they never got the full story or all of the gory details of how it's used. So it had always been an ambition to write a book, but working at a club, obviously we need to sort of keep some secrets and be confidential about what we're doing. So that ambition to write a book was never more than an ambition while I was working at the club. And so after leaving, it was an idea I'd been thinking about for a while, and I suddenly had a lot of free time. So it was the ideal time to get on with writing it.
And how did you decide on the title? Because I love it, How to Win the Premier League. Straight to the point.
Well, I'm not a natural salesman. My preferred title for the book was selected analyses of data sets in football and their application in a professional environment. But then when you write a book, you get an agent, and my agent said that title is not going to sell any copies. You win the Premier League, for pity's sake. You need to call it something like How to Win the Premier League. And so, yeah, it was literally my agent's first suggestion, and everyone loved that title. And it's a little bit tongue in cheek. You can't win the Premier League just by using data analysis, and I hope that comes across in the book. It's just one pillar in a whole range of things that we did at Liverpool. But I hope, an interesting pillar and something that your typical fan might not know too much about.
Which brings me on nicely to the next question, a really difficult one. How did you win the Premier League? Because you're up against Man City's billions, and it's different when you're going on a more restrained budget at Liverpool. But you went toe-to-toe with them year after year and brought in some really great signings.
Yeah, so Manchester City is the best team the Premier League's ever seen. It's the best team world football's ever seen. I think for many years they were underrated, even though everyone agreed they were the best team. I think it really wasn't understood how much they were dominating each game. And so competing against that super team of talents with a brilliant coach as well is very difficult to do. And Fenway have always invested in the club, but they want to spend their money wisely, which is something that I don't disagree with. And so in order to help do that, we had to be perfect in everything we did. We couldn't make mistakes. And how data helps with that is it gives you more intelligence, more insight, a wider view of the transfer market, hopefully a more rational view of the transfer market to, first of all, stop making mistakes, stop wasting money on players that aren't right for your team or players that might arrive for a large transfer fee and leave for nothing a couple of years later. But yeah, competing against Manchester City was an incredibly difficult task, and everything needed to go right. So using data was an edge, but we had a super scouting department. We obviously had a super manager. We had super owners who invested in the stadium, improving that as well. So yeah, very, very hard job to win the Premier League when Pep Guardiola's around.
Now, that job title, Director of Research, I wanted you to elaborate on that if you can, because obviously sports are just going to think transfers, but transfer windows, while you're planning in advance, I'm sure there's more to it than like the Football Manager idea of you go onto a program and go, I like that player, I'm going to go and get him. I'm sure there's much more to it.
Yes, yeah. I mean, Director of Research, I think I was offered that job title because my previous role was head of football research at a company called Decision Technology. And I think the research word in the job title is really because we were trying to develop new models, new ways of understanding football. And so the idea was everything to do with every piece of data that impacted the football inside of the club. So we didn't really look at, commercial performance of the club, but financial data. So how much prize money you get for Champions League and Premier League performance, what transfer fees are, how much players are paid, performance data on the pitch. So event by event, what players are doing on the pitch, how that impacts their team's chance of success. When tracking data arrived, rather than pass by pass, we can see 25 frames per second, what 22 players and the ball are doing. How can that extra level of data improve our predictions of which players are going to be impactful? So any data that was to do with the football performance, that was my department's job to analyse that, generate insights and recommendations from it. And the first thing that leaps out at you from that sort of analysis is most of the money at every professional football club is spent on the playing squad. So on average in the Premier League, 65% of revenue goes on player wages and 25% goes on transfer fees. Some of that 25% is made back through transfer sales, but the gross outgoing is 25% of revenue. And that immediately tells you if you want to make a difference or if you want to get a equivalent level of performance to Manchester City but spend a bit less money, all of the money spent in the playing squad. So optimising that playing squad, getting the best performance out of the players, identifying targets in the transfer window that might arrive for a lower fee than other options who would provide a similar level of performance. That's the critical thing to do. And it's a direct result of analysing the financial data, also the performance data. Really, the quality of the players is the biggest factor in determining, is your team going to be successful or not.
With that data then, has anyone really surprised you then from who you've brought in, or is it all pretty straightforward with the predictions have come through on the pitch?
One of the most important things that we did in the research department was not to teach other colleagues, but to remind everyone of the variability that's involved in football. So in the outcome of one game, you can play well and lose, you can play badly and win, but also the variability of players. So yes, players did surprise me. We make an estimate of a player's impact on their team, and we translate that into an estimate of what their impacts might be should they come to our team. But it's always an estimate, and there are various reasons why the performance you expect or the performance that you've estimated that would happen doesn't arise. Footballers are human beings after all. They could have particular family circumstances. They could be homesick. They might not speak the language and so on. But there are other difficulties. So adapting to a new league, adapting to a different style of play. So we only ever give estimates to say, yes, of course we thought Mo Salah was going to be a very, very good player for Liverpool, but there's a range of performances that we might have expected from him, and he hit the top end of that range of performances. Other players who we expected to do as well, through no fault of their own, did not reach that same level of performance. So reminding everyone of that inherent variability in football, whether it comes to a particular player's performance or the outcome of a particular game, that was something I think really important that we did. I think in terms of players that surprised me, I talk in the book a little bit about Andy Robertson. So he was a very difficult player to analyse because Hull had changed formation. They'd gone from 3 at the back, where he was like an attacking wing back, I think in their championship season. And then they'd gone back to a 4 at the back and playing attacking football while being one of the worst Premier League teams. And so Robertson always looked like one of the league's best attacking fullbacks. But I was concerned about his defence. He had good defensive seasons, but in a different league and in a different formation to what Liverpool played, in a 4 at the back, with Harry Maguire as well, by the way. Had the worst defensive performance across all teams in that season that Hull were relegated. And so I was keen on Robertson for his attacking ability, but I wasn't sure about his defending. And really it was Jurgen that said, I want my fullbacks to attack as the number one priority. We worry about the defending later. Robertson's turned out to be a super defender for Liverpool, and it definitely exceeded my expectations of what we'd observed in the data from his days at Hull.
So how's the whole process work of you looking at players, seeing someone you like, the data looks good, and then them becoming a Liverpool player? Because obviously it's a wider recruitment team. You've got sporting director there. You've got to convince the manager that he's the right player. There's a lot of people involved in getting it over the line, and then you've still got to agree a fee, agree terms.
Yeah, it's a team sport, and so there's been a bit of a caricature of Liverpool and data and so on, that the data drives everything. The data doesn't drive everything. It's one important input into that process that involves every department at the training ground. So in terms of identifying players, what we put in place at Liverpool was a process. Names of players can come from anywhere. So in my team, me and a colleague Dav curated a data list of players. So they popped out in our data as, first of all, playing in a relevant style to Liverpool. You know, they don't have to really switch their style to come and play for Liverpool. Young, what's their contract situation? Is their performance good? What do we project their performance to be 2 years in the future, and so on? So there was a set of names that was always generated by data, but similarly, the scouting department would generate sets of names based on market knowledge, based on which are the best players playing in different leagues. You obviously have agents ringing you up, recommending their players to you, and the manager and the coaching staff watch a lot of football, and they'll get excited about players and raise names as well. The thing we did at Liverpool was to say every name that's generated, it doesn't matter if the name comes from data, comes from scouting, comes from the manager, every player goes through the same process. And from a very long list of possible transfers, that allowed us very quickly to narrow it down to a short list. And again, data is one way to narrow that large number of players. I think, it could be up to 100 players in some cases for one position. We can quickly filter that down to 20 or 30 just based on, do they look good in the data? And then the shortlisted players would go through like a second step of detailed video scouting. So there's always things that the data can't see. And those things our video scouts would go through in great detail. The finances also have to work. There are certain players whose salaries would be above our budget, whose transfer fees would be above our budget. So the salaries also have to be realistic. And then finally, the manager's got to be convinced that the player's going to be right for the team, that he's going to make a difference to the team. And that's an area which Jurgen was critical in. Very open-minded about considering players that might not have been on his radar but were on our radar, and of trusting the detailed work that Michael and the video scouts and my department did on those players as well. Then it finally comes to the stage of, do they actually want to come to the club? And again, Jurgen was an absolute game changer in that in that case, because you ask most players, do you want to come and play for a Jurgen Klopp team? The style of play is super exciting. Jurgen's obviously very charismatic manager. The players love playing for, and so that actually getting the player to come to Liverpool got a lot easier when Jurgen turned up. But we still lost out on players, and previously we'd lost out on players as well. I talk in the book about Alexis Sanchez being one of our top priorities to replace Luis Suarez back in 2014, and we were on the other side of the super manager story there, when you have the legend that is Arsene Wenger come to meet you in person and say, you're going to be the main man at Arsenal. Well, of course, that's going to be a huge attraction to a player, in the same way that Jurgen saying, you're the player I want, is a huge attraction.
I'm going to skip ahead a couple of questions now that you brought up Sanchez, because I did want to ask about those early years, because after you've come into the club, I suppose two of the big successes early on were Sturridge and Coutinho, but then you have the 14-15 signings where they don't all work out, and there was a lot of ridicule for how Liverpool went about things at that time. It was only when Jurgen comes in that there's that faith in the data. You've got a manager who fully buys into it. FSG always fully bought into it. Maybe it was a bit different with Brendan Rodgers. So yeah, how did it work early on? Was it just didn't quite click until Jurgen comes in?
Yeah, and I think that's the difficulty with being inside a club. You can sort of see the inner workings in a way that from the outside, you just see things going wrong. We understood the reasons why things were going wrong, but couldn't really tell the story to the wider world. And in Brendan's defence, he's not a bad manager. He's a very good manager. I think the problem was there's definitely a lack of trust there in terms of the players that we were recommending were not the same sort of players that Brendan liked. We were kind of untested at the time as well. So it was our processes didn't change too much when Jurgen arrived, but it was we were all much younger, and the other members of the transfer committee were much younger and more inexperienced and didn't have a track record. And so I kind of understand the lack of trust in that process from Brendan. The problem was FSG had put in place this idea of a group decision, with the idea being the wisdom of the crowds. If I've got a blind spot when it comes to another particular player, there's always some checks and balances to say, well, hang on, you haven't considered, the finances are wrong for this player, or the style of play is wrong for this player. The idea was to have this collaboration between manager and, well, it wasn't sporting director, but Michael was technical director at the time, and to take inputs from scouting and data, and together we'll come to a better decision than any of us alone would come to. But it just didn't work, and I think there was a lack of trust, which I understand. We didn't have a track record at the time, but also the sort of player that Brendan valued was not the same sort of player that we valued. And I think I remember Michael saying to me once about Mike Gordon at Fenway. He said, Mike sees the football in the same way that I see football. And when Jurgen arrived, he saw football in the same way that Mike and I saw football as well. And there was just a much more natural alignment. So I talk about that first transfer window players, and we previously kind of discounted that looked good in the data. So Joel Matip, Sadio Mane, they were players who had been on our radar but didn't really make it very far through that committee-based process. And so from a data point of view, to have the manager suggesting these names, I was delighted, because, we in the past it was just always a clash between the players Brendan thought would improve the team were just not the same as the players we thought would improve the team.
And if we focus just on 14-15 as a window, you mentioned Alexis Sanchez there. That's the one the data wants. How on earth do you end up with Mario Balotelli when that was one that data-wise doesn't seem to work? The manager didn't seem to really want him. I know it was last resort. It was a strange episode for Liverpool.
Yeah, so again, it was the flaw in the committee-based approach, and I think it's not really a flaw in the approach. It was just a flaw in the group dynamics, really. So the idea was we had to have some sort of agreement on the players that would arrive. So with Sturridge and Coutinho, for example, there was agreement on those players. We thought they were really good. Brendan thought they were really good, and they were successful. I think there's probably a couple of other players in that category, but what happened more often was there was Brendan's first choice to come to the club would be a player that we thought was the wrong style of player, or the finances didn't work, or we didn't think they'd make a big enough impact on the first 11. So Benteke is an example of a player who's a very good player in the right system for him, but Liverpool didn't play the right system for Benteke to prosper and succeed. And so it took a long time to agree on a player. So Brendan's choice number one would be a player that, for whatever reason, we'd say is not a good idea to bring. And then we'd bring our first choices to the table, and Brendan would not want those players to come to the club for whatever reason, and so on. And we ended up quite often not signing our first choice player, which was Sanchez in that season, but not signing our second and third choice player because there was this difference of opinion between what we thought was a relevant player to improve Liverpool. So Balotelli was probably choice number 6 or number 7. The other thing is, as the transfer window proceeds, more and more strikers get signed by other clubs. And so when you're in late August, there's a limited number of players remaining. From a data point of view, Balotelli looked like a super player. So I was really excited to to sign Balotelli. He was only 24. He'd played for huge clubs and made a difference to huge clubs on the pitch. If we got the best version of Balotelli on the pitch, then the price we paid for him would be an absolute bargain. And Brendan met him before the season. The meeting went really well. I was optimistic about the signing, and again, you can look at the performance on the pitch. Balotelli was pretty unlucky not to score more than he did in that season. On the pitch, he was okay. He wasn't particularly bad for Liverpool. The sort of the failure was that he didn't get on the pitch. So for whatever reason, he was never first choice as a striker. Brendan didn't really trust him. He didn't really behave badly in any way at Liverpool. He was just sort of never first choice. And again, if the process had worked properly, Balotelli wouldn't have arrived at the club. From a data, he's also a good sort of case study of data. If all you care about is a player's data, then Balotelli is the player to sign. But you sign a person, you don't just sign a set of statistics that will appear on the league table at the end of the season. And even though Mario didn't really do anything wrong at Liverpool, he came with a certain reputation that made it quite easy to put him to one side.
And if we look over that period, there must have been a frustration for you because the manager's the one coming out and speaking to the media, and there was that divide going, this player's the one the manager signed when they seem to do well, when they didn't do well, or that's the transfer committee. And then it almost comes to a head in Rodgers' final few months with Benteke, with Roberto Firmino. I suppose this book is that chance for the unheard of recruitment team to have their say.
So I think, one of the reasons for writing the book is to try and show as honestly as possible and in my own voice, my understanding of those events. It's not so much about redressing the balance as to kind of, I wanted to sort of say what really happened as I understood it. And again, I completely understand Brendan's desire to buy Benteke. He destroyed us time and time again when he played for Aston Villa. He was absolutely unplayable. Brendan had to change formation at half time in one game because I think he'd scored one or two already and looked like he was going to score even more in the second half. And when you've got a player who's just, that was not a great Aston Villa side either. When you've got a player that's just destroying you, not just once or twice, but time and time again, I can absolutely understand, the emotional impact that makes and how brilliant that player looks. But the fact was, we did not play a style of football that was suited to a target man, which is what Benteke is. And so Benteke's a great player in the right system, but this wasn't the right system. And that argument, as I explain in the book, that argument has been going on for years. Brendan finally got his man, and Firmino was how a reward for Brendan getting his man. And again, Firmino is not an easy player to understand. So I think one of the reasons we didn't face too much competition in the transfer market was the question is, what is he? As a number 9, he doesn't really score enough. He played wide. He also played at number 10, and he kind of played all of those roles quite well, but he wasn't a superstar in any one of the roles. So if it's a player that you're not particularly motivated to sign, and is this kind of puzzle of a player of what's his best role, I can understand, the lukewarm reception that Brendan gave to Firmino. But, we saw the talent, we saw that versatility was probably undervalued by other clubs. And I think Firmino's presence at Liverpool was a factor in in Jurgen arriving, because Jurgen had loved Firmino for years in the Bundesliga.
I want to go on to probably the biggest success story now, and that's Mo Salah. So obviously someone Liverpool tried to sign a few years before. It didn't happen, didn't work at Chelsea. There's always been the talk that Jurgen needed persuading there. What was your take on that whole signing of Mohamed Salah and what he's gone on to achieve for Liverpool? Because he's one of their greatest ever Premier League players now.
Yes, so January 2014, we tried to sign him. He'd been great. We only had UEFA competition data at that point. We didn't have Swiss League data. But in UEFA competition, as like a 20-year-old winger, he'd been brilliant. I think he'd played very well against Spurs and Chelsea already at that stage. So from a data point of view, it was early days, but he looked really good. And Chelsea, we thought we were going to sign him. And Jan 2014, we already had a great attack that season. So how many minutes he would have got for Liverpool is a question if he had arrived. But Chelsea blew us out of the water with their bid for him. And I don't know if Chelsea signed him just so we couldn't sign him, or there didn't seem to be much of a plan for Mo at Chelsea. So that was just another one to chalk up to experience at the time. And then when we did get round to signing him in 2017, again, we were surprised there was no or very little Premier League competition for his signing. And if you're in the privileged position of being Liverpool, Premier League competition is like the rest of the big six. And Mo was playing to a standard where he would have been a good signing for most, if not all of the big six. He looked great in our data. I talk about possession value models in the book, and he really shone as a under 24 player as a wide forward in Europe. Was one of the best in Europe, according to our sort of more complicated data analysis. But even if you just look at goals and assists, he'd been brilliant in Italy, and that profile of player usually gets a lot of interest from the big Premier League clubs. And I think the reason he didn't generate a lot of interest was it was seen that he'd failed at Chelsea because he didn't get on the pitch. I think in the sort of few hundred minutes he got at Chelsea, if you looked at him on a per 90 minutes basis, when he was on the pitch, he played, just about as well as he'd played at Roma, or a little bit below that level perhaps, but well within expectations. But this idea of being a failure seemed to be like a mark against him. And I don't know, because looking from the outside, you never know. But I think that kind of caused some hesitation at recruitment departments at other clubs. Do we really want to bring this player in who's proved to be a failure in the Premier League? And so we looked into the details. Why didn't he get on the pitch in the Premier League? Mourinho is a manager who likes to play senior, experienced players, and he had Eden Hazard in front of him in his preferred position. It's like, of course he's not going to play. Is this really Mo's fault? But alongside that, it's never just the data. So, Michael in particular was convinced that Mo had a personality, that he was desperate to show the world that he could do it in the Premier League. So that understanding the personal motivation of players is really important. And also, you're right to say that he wasn't Jurgen's first choice, and Jurgen was generous enough to say at the time that Mo wasn't his first choice, and that Michael, Dave Fallows and Barry Hunter from the scouting department really persuaded him that that he was the player to sign. And I think that was the difference. Mo is an example of a collaboration working well, where data and scouting and the manager brought different names to the table, but had a constructive conversation. And we changed our minds because of it. We came to we were happy to agree that Mo was the best player. He's the player I wanted anyway, so it was easy for me to agree.
And with Mo, I suppose he's one of a few examples where you've got a number of names on that shortlist. Sadio Mane comes to mind when he was up against, I think it was Mario Götze. Diogo Jota's another. So I wanted to ask, which players did you really have to bang the drum for to get them in? And there are any that you would have liked that didn't quite happen when it was going elsewhere, other than Alexis Sanchez that you've already mentioned?
Yeah, Sanchez is a great one. Back when I was working for Spurs, there was a chance to get Mesut Ozil when he was still at Werder Bremen. That would have been quite a different history. And then going back to the sort of earlier years at Liverpool, and again, it's sort of like so. I think every season when Brendan was manager, Benteke scored against Liverpool or played brilliantly against them at least. So in 2013, there was a chance of signing Diego Costa, and we were we were younger and a little bit more naive at the time. So there were various reasons why the Costa signing fell through. But can you imagine a Liverpool front pairing of Luis Suarez and Diego Costa? The world would not know what was hitting them.
With some of Liverpool's signings, it did seem as though they're waiting for that man. That is the one they want, like a Van Dijk and Alisson. I'm guessing the data for them is top level. You're not beating that because it was a case of, if we're not getting Alisson, it seems we're not getting a new keeper. If we're not getting Van Dijk, we're going to wait until January so we can try again.
Yeah. So the sort of, every team wants to get better. And if you give us a choice, do you want to be a better team or a worse team? We're going to pick being a better team. The price you pay for being a better team is, the prices of players that are going to improve your performance increase, but also the pool of players that's going to increase your performance that decreases. And so as we get better and better, there are fewer and fewer players that are going to make a difference. We paid a lot of attention to squad management. Any money we were spending, we wanted that money to be on the pitch rather than sat on the bench. And so we really, before making a signing, and especially before spending big money on a signing, as we did with Van Dijk and Alisson, we wanted to be absolutely sure that this player is going to improve our level of performance. Those two players were easy. At the time, we were like one of the best attacking teams in Europe, but we weren't one of the best defensive teams in Europe. So rebalancing that team, again, it's something that Michael and Mike Gordon were absolutely convinced of and was absolutely the right thing to do. Improving the defence was easier than improving the attack. But yeah, because as you get better, that pool of players decreases. It's hard to be disciplined in the transfer window and say we're going to wait for a player that will definitely improve us. With Alisson, there really weren't that many other options of young goalkeepers who were already world-class shot stoppers. Or Black at Atletico was the other one, but they played a very different style of football. So Alisson was a more natural fit for Liverpool. And then Van Dijk was the best young. I think he was under 27 at the time, so that still just about counts as young for a centre-back. He was the best young centre-back, not already playing in a Champions League team. With Van Dijk, there were a couple of other options, but they weren't really financially any cheaper than Van Dijk, and this level of performance wasn't quite as high as well. And so, yeah, we were happy to wait for the perfect player, and it's hard to have that discipline when there's I think lots of fans prefer the transfer window to the actual football. There's always a clamour for signings, and so my Liverpool supporting friends, I had to kind of defend what we were doing, say, well, Chelsea have signed 6 already this summer, what are we doing? We've been left behind. So well, we want to sign a player that's going to play a lot of games and improve the team. They're thin on the ground. We're going to wait and use our ammunition wisely. We're going to only spend when that money is going to make a difference on the pitch for us.
Now, the Liverpool you joined was very different to the Liverpool you left. When you come in, it's just getting to the Champions League again, almost mid-table, whereas you leave a team that has won every major honour. we see how the team had to change on the pitch. I imagine that made it more difficult for you off the pitch as well, because while more money is available for signings, it's always a smaller pool as well for the talent that is going to improve the team. So how did you deal with that transition as the team got better, making your work harder?
Yeah, it's a mix. It gets harder in some ways and it gets easier in other ways. So when we were the team we were in 2012 that needed a lot of investment, a lot of care and attention, there was a much larger pool of players that could improve us, as you say. Difficulty in that case was really finding the players who fit in our financial model at the time, and also the player has to want to come to Liverpool. And so when we competed against Arsenal, for example, do you want to come to play for Arsene Wenger in the Champions League, or do you want to come and maybe qualify for Europa League at Liverpool? Players would tend to choose Arsenal over Liverpool. So the pool was bigger, but it was harder to secure your first choice targets. Your first choice targets had to be players that, a big Champions League team didn't want to sign. So we had to go younger, or we had to go slightly riskier with our signings, which was good from a data point of view, because my favourite thing is to look at a list of 100 players from different leagues that I don't know the first thing about and start to try and understand those players through the data. And then as that's changed, it becomes more difficult. As you say, prices go up, this pool of players decreases. The thing that made it easy at Liverpool was Jurgen's approach to the game. So he had a very well-defined style of play and a very well-defined positional role for each position. So Sadio and Mo, you knew exactly what their roles were on the pitch, what they're expected to do. They're not wingers, they're wide forwards who are expected to, create the bulk of the shots at the team. Firmino is not a number 9. He's something between a number 9 and an attacking midfielder, and he has to be a provider as well as take shots. The fullbacks have to overlap and attack and be very good passers and crossers. The midfielders have to fall back and clean up when attacks go wrong. The defenders have to defend huge spaces. So having those really well-defined roles was really, really good for us in the transfer market, because so many players went on a list of great player not for Liverpool because he wouldn't fit into the style, or he hadn't yet demonstrated that he could play in that similar style. The difficulty was really more in the discipline to say, we're not going to sign anyone because we know we need this from our fullback. Yes, these are good fullbacks, but we're taking more of a leap to say we think they can change their style and still perform for us. And so the discipline of not signing players was the most difficult thing. The luxury that we had was when we decided to sign a player, more often than not, we got that player. Not all of the time, but more often than not, we got that player. And we'd learned back in 2012 that's not always the case. Even at Liverpool, you don't always get the player that you want. And so for most clubs, you always have to make some compromise. So I prefer to be in the luxurious position of having such a good team that very few signings are going to make a difference for you. Not many teams are in that position.
Now, FSG do get some stick for the way they've gone about things recruitment-wise, with it being limited, with it being that restraint on the finances. And I know, like, one of the few times we've heard from you in the past is saying, Kylian Mbappe is a standout player, but he's not in Liverpool's reach financially. So how did it work for deciding whether a player was within Liverpool's financial means or not? Because it's not a case of you going to FSG and they're like going, oh no, you can't have this, it's better in our bank account.
Yeah, so that's a very unfair caricature of FSG. So they're always very happy to invest in the team, but the team's got to be self-sufficient to a certain degree. I think they've showed with their capital infrastructure projects like 2 stadium expansions, new training ground. They're very happy to invest in the team if they can see the money's being wisely spent. I think I can't speak for Fenway, but I can give my view, and I think in a similar way to Fenway. There are two ways you spend your money as a football club: in the transfer market and on player wages. And the transfer market is a very inefficient way to spend money. In the book, I've got a chapter on the transfer market and how terribly inefficient it is. And so I think before I joined Liverpool, Fenway had probably come to the same conclusion that it's a bad way of spending money. Now, the other way you spend money is through player wages, and that's where the bulk of the money goes. You don't read too much about it on the Echo, but 65% on average in the Premier League on wages, 25% on transfers. And some of that transfer money is made back through sales as well. And what Fenway did demonstrate is that they're very happy to spend on wages. So as Liverpool progressed from Champions League contenders in 2016-17 to champions in 2019-20 and, regular later stages of the Champions League participants, they demonstrated that they were willing to fund that in terms of wages. So our star players earn star player money because that's what it takes to keep them at Liverpool. And from a sort of statistical and a financial point of view, that is a way of spending money that is more correlated with success than transfer fees. And so a pound is a pound. It doesn't matter how it gets spent. You should just look at the total amount of money that gets spent. If you add wages onto transfer fees, Fenway spend more than most fans think they spend. We still spend less than the Manchester clubs, but yeah, Fenway are kind of unfairly maligned for their meanness. I was happy to stick with their financial program for 11 years, which hopefully says something.
Now, earlier in the chat, you mentioned making it stressing to your team the importance of understanding the variables on players. I suppose one thing for that is injuries, because there have been it's been a patchy injury record for Liverpool at times, and just two names like Naby Keita or Thiago Alcantara. So how do you weigh that up? Because I don't think Keita had much of an injury poor form before he came to Liverpool, whereas Thiago does have it. How does that is considered when you do make these signings, and then the frustration when they are picking up injuries when they're Liverpool, they can't really show what they're about?
Yeah, injury predictions very hard. So injuries are rare events. In the book, I've got a chapter about betting that talks about the Poisson distribution, and that describes the statistics of rare events. So lots of injuries are bad luck. Some injuries, so typically sort of soft muscle tissue strains and sprains, tends to be the kind of less bad luck, more overuse sort of injuries. But yeah, injury predictions fundamentally very hard. There's a few variables that predict injuries, like your past record of injuries is somewhat predictive of your future injury likelihood. And Thiago arrived with those past injuries as part of his career, but Naby certainly didn't arrive with that injury record. So he had a particularly unlucky run. He also arrived at a team going from a Bundesliga season of 34 games to a Premier League plus Europe plus 2 Cups season, plus a extremely high intensity way of playing compared to Bundesliga, and a training regime where the manager demands 100% from training as well as in games, was clearly a difficult change for him. But then other players with very little background of injury had made that similar leap without problems. So yeah, really our failed transfers, injuries is what caused that failure to happen. Some of them, Thiago arrived with a career of past injuries. Some of them were more expected than others. I think Naby, every time he got a run of games, he got injured. He got, I think he even got caught up in a coup when he was on international duty in Guinea. It's kind of like every time I thought, right, now we're going to see the real Naby. We didn't see the real Naby, and injuries really derailed that. It's probably the least predictable and the least forecastable aspect of understanding if a player is going to be successful at a new club or not.
I'm going to focus on failed transfer there, but take it a different way. What really happened with Nabil Fekir? Because I know John Achterberg's been speaking on a podcast recently saying that if that had gone through, he probably wouldn't have got Alisson. So it seems like you're looking for a Coutinho replacement, and that there's the mystery of why that really fell through to go, actually, let's just focus on improving the goalkeeper, improving the defence.
I don't know what John's been saying about Nabil Fekir. I don't want to say too much in detail about that particular transfer. He was a transfer target for us. He was a great player with a similar profile to Coutinho. So if we were in the market for a Coutinho replacement, I was excited about his signing. I think at the same time, this conversation about rebalancing the squad was going on, and yeah, we already had a 99th percentile attack, even without Coutinho in it, but we didn't have a 99th percentile defence. I think there were, one thing to say with injuries in general is there were several cases of players that failed medicals at Liverpool who then went on to transfer to other clubs. So it's not my area of expertise at all, but I believe we were as diligent or more diligent than other clubs when it came to medicals. And again, it's due to that insistence that we're happy to spend money, but that money's got to play on the pitch. It's got to, why buy a player to sit on the bench is what it comes down to.
Now you left the club last summer, but I'm assuming that you're still involved in the recruitment last year. So what was the data telling you about Darwin Núñez?
Darwin Núñez would be summer 22. So yeah, that was the last transfer window I was involved in. Darwin Núñez looked really good in the data. One of the best, or yeah, just about the best under 24 centre forward, if you exclude Haaland from the list, obviously. And again, Haaland's a great example of transfer fee versus wages. Really, you need to look at the total financial outlay for each player. So even though Núñez's fee was higher, the total financial outlay for Núñez was not in the same ballpark as for Haaland. So Núñez looked really good. I think him and Isak were the two standouts aside from Haaland. The difficulty with Núñez was replacing Firmino. So for many years I spoke before about this very well-defined set of roles that we had. And Firmino was a difficult role to replace because he was, halfway between a centre-forward and a attacking midfielder. And brilliant a player though Núñez is, he's a number 9. He plays one role, which is centre-forward. So the discussions about Núñez were not discussions about is he a good player or not. Yes, he's a very, very good player. The discussions were, how is he going to fit into the system? Does Jurgen want to change his system to accommodate a striker with very different talents to Firmino? Replacing a unique player like Firmino, you're always going to have those discussions. It's never going to be an easy task to replace such a unicorn. But the questions were more about style than about quality with Núñez.
I appreciate so far it's been very transfer heavy, but is part of the role, would it have also been looking at the players you had in the squad when it comes to new contracts? Because obviously you've got Salah and Van Dijk who are wrong side of 30 now, out of contract next summer. Very different situation to when they came to the club at the peak of their powers. Is that something that you're looking at and what would the data tell you there about what Liverpool could do with their futures?
Yeah, so it's kind of, it goes unsaid most of the time, but a precursor to recruitment, before you think about signing players or selling players, you've got to understand the strength of your squad, when contracts are expiring, whether to renew a player's contract or consider transferring the player. And so that squad planning was something we paid a lot of attention to. And again, going back to that, if we want to spend money, it's got to be on the pitch. Our squad players, I say our squad players, what a luxury to have James Milner as a squad player. But those players that we brought in who might not start every game, or even brought in as starters, if they could play 2 or 3 different positions, that meant we could run a thinner squad. And it's not a thinner squad to try and be cheap. It's a thinner squad such that if I have to pay 22 players instead of paying 30 players, it means I can pay each player more money, and that means each player is going to be better in a smaller squad. So that squad planning was a huge focus for us. Players like Milner, Fabinho was another player. He never actually played full back for us, but spent 2 seasons as right back at Monaco. Firmino could play all across the front line, as could Sadio. And yeah, related to that, it typically comes 2 or 3 years into a contract. If a player's been playing very well, you have to decide renewed contract or consider a transfer for the player. If the player's young and playing well, of course we want to keep them. As players get older, the equation you've got to solve is, do we want to keep 2 years of super performance and pay the wages that go along with that super performance, and recognise that the player might be 33 or 34 at the end of that extended contract and would be unlikely to realise a transfer fee for it? Or do we say, this is our last best chance to take a transfer fee on that player? Do we take that fee and try and reinvest it in the squad? When you've got generational talents like Van Dijk and Salah, it's very, very difficult to say, okay, we're going to take a transfer fee and reinvest it in the squad. Some of the last work I did was about Salah's longevity and how long can he keep producing for. And I went into the analysis fully expecting to say, now is the time to sell Mo. This has been summer 21 or 22, I can't remember. But yeah, to my surprise, it was Mo's going to keep producing for a couple of years, and you can't replace Mo's level of performance. If you replace Mo, you're replacing with a younger player who might get to Mo's level in a couple of years. Or if you want to replace what Mo does today, you tell me a player who's going to replace what Mo Salah has done for Liverpool since 2017.
Put you on your spot now. Would you give him another contract then? What would your data now tell you 2 years on?
Well, it was a privilege working for Liverpool, but it was also a huge responsibility as well. And I'm really enjoying the fact that responsibility is not on my shoulders anymore. So I'm just watching Liverpool as a fan today. I don't care about the finances. My opinion as a fan, I want to see Mo Salah in red for as long as possible. But I understand if that's not the best decision, and I trust the decision makers at Liverpool to make the right decision.
Very diplomatic. Obviously, you left last summer after 11 years. You talk there about the responsibility on your shoulders, but there's always been those whispers of, have people fallen out with Jurgen Klopp? Because a lot of the backroom team left at the same time, and now he's gone. A fair few of them have come back. So what was your reasoning behind wanting to leave? It was just after a decade you fancied a new challenge, you already won everything with Liverpool, or was there a bit of unhappiness there behind the scenes?
Yeah, it was. It was brilliant. Who wouldn't want the opportunity to work for Liverpool, to work for John Henry, to work with Jurgen Klopp? It was a brilliant 11 years, but 11 years is a big chunk of anyone's career. And I yeah, I needed a new challenge. Plus, the season is a grind. You know, world's smallest violin. You have to work for Liverpool. Poor you. But after a certain amount of time, you just need a break from it. And I think, you saw last season, Jurgen needed a break from it as well. We all reach our breaking point at different times, and yeah, that was the main reason. Michael reached his. Michael needed a break before I did. He had a much more stressful job than I did. I think only after handing in my notice did I realise how tired I was and how in need of a break I was.
You went to set up your own consultancy, Ludo Nautics. I've probably butchered that, so sorry if I have. But you set that up with Michael. But then a year, 18 months on, 2 years on, whatever it was, Michael goes back to FSG. So how did you find out about that, and how's the company going now without him?
Yeah, so I was surprised. I was surprised that Michael was interested in joining the company, and it was great to be working with him again, and also in a completely different environment. So as a startup, we were the only two people working for the company in its very early days, and even in the very early days, I was kind of surprised that he was doing this full time. He'd spoken to a couple of other clubs, and I kept saying to him, "You're going to go back, aren't you? Some club is going to give you an offer you can't refuse." And he said he would never go back to being a director of football. And so I think Fenway offered him to go back as a director of football. And I was delighted that he was true to his word and said, "No, I don't want to be a director of football again." And then they made him an offer he couldn't refuse. So I was actually in Boston speaking at the MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference, and Michael had come along with me representing Ludonautics. And so, yeah, he was doorstopped by Fenway and given this amazing offer. And, if I was given that offer, I'd find it very difficult to turn down as well. So the opportunity of, first of all, being given the responsibility at an even higher level of making sure Liverpool continues to be successful, but also being given the project of, or the opportunity of looking at purchasing a club in Europe, to set the agenda for that from scratch. What a brilliant opportunity. So disappointed as I am, I can see why he went back. And the new business is going really well. I think thankfully we're prospering even without Michael's expert advice.
If he was on the phone to you, though, offering you the chance to go back, be part of a more senior role with FSG in this multi-sports operation, is that something you'd be tempted by, or are you happy on the outside now?
I think so. At Liverpool, I made the mistake of hiring people that are smarter than I am. So I kind of made myself redundant. I think, when I handed in my notice, I was thinking, I'm not sure what it is I even do at Liverpool anymore, because my colleagues were doing most of the technical work by that point. So Liverpool certainly don't need my expertise anymore. That department's got some really great talent working in it. I think, having been inside a club, I'm not tempted to go back. It's quite nice being a third-party consultant. So, we're asked our opinion. We hopefully improve clubs' performances, but we don't have that pressure and that spotlight and that. Well, you haven't signed anyone yet this window that all clubs go through.
So looking back over those 11 years, who are your favourite signings for Liverpool?
It's boring to say Mo, isn't it? Boring.
It's the obvious one, though, isn't it?
Yeah. I think, from a data perspective, the players that might not have arrived without the data, the two players are Joel Matip and Andy Robertson. I think in terms of how they perform compared to expectations, not my expectations, but maybe fan expectations or, the football world's expectations. And the fact that they would they've kind of been discounted for different reasons. It was really pleasing to see them become world-class players. They already had that potential. That potential for them to become world-class was in the data, but they weren't there yet. So to see them become the players that they became was really, really nice to see. With Mo, it's sort of like we all knew he was brilliant. All you have to do was perform. The kind of lesser understood or the lesser lights in other people's eyes, they were my favourite signings. Joel Matip on a free transfer. It's ridiculous. And Andy Robertson, basically in exchange for Kevin Stewart, is not a bad deal either.
Now, you're not on the books anymore, but the data's still there. Some of the people are still there, will come back. There's a new head coach in Arne Slot, so the baton has been passed on. But can Liverpool win the Premier League again? Is there going to be a sequel to this book?
I mean, what would we call it? How to win the Premier League again? So, I'm just a fan these days. I was a Liverpool fan before I worked for the club, and I'm back to being a fan now. I think Arne is a really exciting young manager. He did some great things with, lesser known players at Feyenoord. He got a real tune out of them. The backroom staff's really good. The squad's still really good. I believe in Liverpool. It's difficult to win the Premier League when Manchester City are your rivals. But it can be done with a bit of luck and a bit of skill. It can be done again. I won't be writing the sequel. I'll leave that to someone who's still there.
As the boyhood Liverpool fan, you got to be in this senior role in a privileged position on the inside as they have that most successful period. I suppose for you, you've lived the dream here.
Yeah, it's the highs were very high. The lows were also quite low. Being a fan of the club at the same time as working at the club is a difficult thing. So when I worked for the club, people asked if I was a Liverpool fan, and I'd reply, I used to be a Liverpool fan, because having that fan emotion at the same time as being involved in decision making, it's just too much. So you have to switch off the fan part of your brain while you work for the club. That being said, it did mean more that I was working for Liverpool compared to another club. When we had that success, it was special.
Thanks, Ian. I think that's all I've got written down question-wise. I appreciate I've been keeping you talking for a while, so I'll let you go and enjoy your day. But good luck with the book. Thanks for your time. As we mentioned at the start of the podcast, How to Win the Premier League, it is on sale on August the 15th. All the information will be in the episode information. If this is a taste of what you can expect in the book, I'm going to be reading that straight away. It sounds fascinating, a real insight into this data revolution. Thanks again, Ian, and until next time, thanks and goodbye.